I wanted to read the story to you. It's been told many different ways. I heard it told in such a way that Buddha was coming into a town, and there was a group of people, and within that group of people was one person that was, for some reason, upset with the Buddha. And he was mad that the Buddha was there, and he was just angry at the Buddha. I'm not sure why, but he was just pointing anger at that particular person, which happened to be the Buddha. In this particular story, I'm not even sure what the name of this story is, but I know it by the name of The Angry Man and the Gift. So, after many days of travel, the Buddha arrived at a small town to give a speech. Everyone was happy to see him, except for one young man. While Buddha spoke, the man was shouting at him. The Buddha did not pay attention and continued speaking. This infuriated the man even more. He walked directly in front of the Buddha and continued to ridicule him. He said, "You have no right to teach others. You're stupid and you're a fake." And I even heard in one story that he even spat on the Buddha, which would be an incredibly bad karma, I would think. The crowd began to react to this young man's heuristic behavior. The Buddha stopped the crowd from turning against him and said, "It is not always necessary to counter aggression by aggression." Instead, he turned to the man and asked, "If you buy a gift for someone and that person does not take it, to whom does that gift belong?" The young man was surprised by the question, thought for a moment, and answered, "It would belong to me because I bought the gift." The Buddha said, "Correct. It's the same with your anger. If you become angry with me and I don't feel insulted nor accept your hostility, the anger falls back on you as it was intentionally yours to give. You are then the only one who becomes unhappy, not me. All you've done is hurt yourself." The young man understood, clasped his hands together, and slowly bowed to the Buddha. It was an acknowledgement that this man learned a valuable lesson that day. And so the Buddha concluded, as a mirror reflects an object, as a still lake reflects the sky, take care that what you speak or act is for good. For goodness will always cast back goodness, and harm will always cast back harm. The lesson from the person that wrote this, he wrote down several things. No matter, I'll just read three different things actually. No matter what the situation, if you surrender yourself to anger, if you surrender your personal power to others, they will always take your life away from you. Instead, be the mirror, the reflection of themselves now. The only person who truly gets infected by their negativity is them. And those that are angry, it is pain and sadness that is disguised by the anger. And those who are hurt and attempt to put that on others are the only ones who suffer. If you're mindful enough to choose not to allow it in, instead you can find your personal power in your higher self and put aside your ego. Never let anyone rob you of your personal power because it's about them, not you. Instead of allowing others to inhibit your greatness or try to disempower you, rather than choosing to react, be the gift you give to the world and to them. Never underestimate the positive impact, influence you can have on others. That's why the gift is you. So, we've all heard that, I hope we have anyway, that when we get angry, the only person that we're hurting is ourselves. And that's very, very true. I mean, we can feel that within us. And we sometimes we feel Well, we also feel that if we don't get that anger out, that it's kind of like bottling up a teapot or something, you know, that it's going to explode, boom, you know, and that anger is going to cause more harm staying within us if we're angry than letting it out. And so I think it's just kind of a habitual thing that when we get angry, supposedly get angry at somebody, that we show it. We show that anger towards somebody. It doesn't have to be that way. You know, different people treat their anger differently than others. You know, what do we do with that anger when it's within us? Some people use it in such a way that their anger can be pointed at someone directly, or their anger can be pointed at a different activity. Sometimes people will, when they get angry, they hold it within, and then they go out and do something that they probably might regret later. In other words, they go out and you know, do one of their habitual things that they shouldn't be doing, like drinking or you know, just, you know, something. Sometimes people will kind of say, well, I'll show them, and then they'll do this thing, you know, which isn't necessarily good for anybody. But I think in a mindfully, and we can talk about this later after our meditation, but from a mindful standpoint, the best thing to do is to, you know, have some reflection, to really be the witness of the anger, to see that anger come up, to understand it, to feel it within the body, to know, you know, the chemicals and the chemical responses that are happening within the body. We can feel the heat of anger. We can feel, you know, sometimes maybe an upset stomach, or, you know, these kinds of indigestion kind of things, and all sorts of things that can come up out of anger. And to be the witness of that is to notice it, and to notice how it feels, and watch it, and see how it comes, and ultimately see how it goes, see how it falls away, rising and falling. You know, for somebody to become angry, they have to be hurt within. You know, there has to be some pain within them for anger to come up out of them. And so, if they're pointing anger at us, we can have a great deal, and we should have a great deal of compassion for these people that have this anger. That's usually the last thing we think about. You know, we think that if somebody's angry at us and pointing fingers at us, and in reality, if a person gets angry at us, they feel that anger was stimulated by that person out there. But in reality, the anger is coming from within that person. You know, so something triggered anger. And, you know, we're just kind of picking on the emotion of anger, but it could actually be anything, any kind of emotion that comes up, any kind of negative emotion, or even, you know, a positive emotion. If something triggers it, a lot of times it's not necessarily the thing that gets the emotion pointed at. It could be anything else. It could be something, you know, triggers are funny, you know, these different kind of triggers that come up, you know, any kind of emotion that comes up for us is ultimately comes up by a thought, and a thought as a reference to something that has happened in the past. For example, if somebody did something that angered somebody, and let's say there was a child in the room, that child wouldn't get angry by what somebody else did. Let's say there's a parent, a parent and just a mother carrying a child. Somebody does something that angers the mother. That doesn't. The child is a witness of this, but the child isn't going to get angry. In other words, I'm saying a child because maybe the child hasn't had that kind of response, hasn't experienced that kind of trigger before, that has caused, that situation, which is the emotion coming up. And so it's triggers, these emotions come up from triggers and thoughts, placing ourselves outside of the present moment, thinking of how that same thing could have harmed us in the past and how it might harm us in the future, which can bring up all sorts of emotions for us. Mark, yeah.
How do you feel about like if you're around someone that every time you're around them, they're angry and always...
That person is angry?
Yeah, that person's always angry and then it makes you angry, then it's like I actually try to avoid just being around them. Because they don't...
Yeah, we have...
You can't control the way they are. But.
We have two choices, really. We can avoid them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as we do it mindfully. Mindful avoidance, I guess we can call it. This might be a new study program or something. But the other thing is to be mindful of being in that person's presence and just watching that come up. It's kind of like being mindful. There's a practice that we can do as far as, like a mindfulness practice that we can do when we're watching TV. And it's really interesting, because we can be there by ourselves and we can see and just remind ourselves that we're going to watch our reactions to everything that we're seeing on TV, the news, whether it's a movie or whatever it might be, because that's commercials. I mean, commercials are they're geared. I mean, the whole TV scene is geared to bring up these emotions for us. And the more emotions that come up, the more money that network will make, actually, because we're drawn into it. And so if we're doing this practice in front of the TV, watching all these things come up for us, and just being the witness of all this, ultimately, we can do that while we're with others. So if we're with a person that it makes us angry, it's really a good, interesting study in our own human nature to see how that stuff comes up for us, to see it come virtually out of nowhere. We're not thinking about that person that makes us angry. There's no anger, there's nothing there. And then this angry person walks into the room, and all of a sudden, you got these juices start flowing, and then we start getting this familiar feeling like, oh, this angry person makes me angry, and one thing leads to another. But if we're that witness, it changes everything. If we're watching all of that from within us, it changes it all, and we become the investigator, the private investigator of our emotions, and we learn a lot. We can learn a great deal from doing that. Just like watching TV, it's really no difference in doing that TV practice than doing it in real life, But that's a very good question, because that happens to us a lot. There's I was actually telling Terry this story the other day when we were hiking about, I think it was Atisha, who is a Tibetan monk. And in Tibet, when they would travel around and teach, just like the Buddha did. The Buddha walked everywhere, and he taught from place to place. And in Tibet, they would call these lamas and these teachers, these monks, to come and teach, and then they would travel from one place to another. And in Tibet, the traveling was always pretty difficult, from my understanding. I can only imagine. And the Satisha had a cook. Everybody, he had followers with him all the the people were with him all the time, traveled with him, and and these people had to eat, And he had this one particular cook that had a wagon, to haul the pots and the pans and all the food, because these people had to eat. Just like you can just imagine like a big camping trip or something like that. We have to eat. People have to eat. Especially in Tibet, they just can't find food anywhere. And this cook was always obnoxious. I mean, he was like a very, very obnoxious person. He was always making a lot of noise, rattling pots and pans, and just saying the wrong things at the wrong time. Nobody liked him. Everybody was just kind of disgusted by having this guy around. And these are spiritual, highly spiritual people. And finally somebody asked Atisha, why do you have this cook around? Why do you have him here? And he said we all need something to work with. We need these things to work with. Otherwise we don't learn our lessons. We don't get it, So the lesson there is that if we live a life that is just a wonderful life that has no suffering in it and no difficulties at all, we would not learn nearly as much as we would as if we have this life where we do suffer and we learn these lessons, and these lessons come our way. Like working with difficult people, that's the reality of life too. The funny thing, even if we if we were in a room of wonderful, loving people like we are now, if we spent day after day after day after day together, sooner or later one of us would find something about another person, another person here in this room that kind of rubs them the wrong way, regardless of how loving and gentle and caring everybody is. There'd be something that would come up, and there's always these lessons out there. There's always something to learn by that. There's always emotions, and these emotions in Buddhism, originally they're looked at as feelings, like these sensations that come into the body from things that we like and things that we don't like. There's pleasurable feelings and these unpleasurable feelings. And these feelings, they turn into these states, these mind states or states of mind, which are the moods and emotions that we deal with. And they're all triggered by these thoughts that we have. And we already talked about that here, about the thoughts of the past and the future and things that trigger, these emotions for us. So we become very familiar with them. And it comes to such an extent that we can see somebody that reminds us of somebody that gave us a bad time at some point in our life. It might even be subconscious. We don't even know why. We see this person and we don't like them. Because way, way back, 30 years ago, and we forgot about the incident, but this person that looks like this person said something we didn't like. And so we carry that with us, And if we are completely asleep, we will carry that with us for the rest of our lives. That particular looking person we don't like. But if we are mindful and somewhat awake, we'll realize that it's just a trigger. It's just something that has come about because of something that happened a long time ago. A lot of you people miss the story about the Buddha, but it was a story about a man that was angry at the Buddha, and he was giving the Buddha a hard time. And the Buddha said, if you give a gift and I don't accept it, whose gift is it? And the man said, well, then it's mine. And the moral of the story is that if you get angry at somebody, and even if that person does not, especially if they do not accept that anger, it hurts us more than it hurts them. Please bring your attention to the breath for a few moments and see how that feels for you. We bring our attention to the breath, we can bring our attention to a feeling or a visualization of the breath, like a sensation of the inhalation or the exhalation. We can notice how the breath feels when we bring in the energy into the body, or when we exhale, how relaxing that can feel. So the body is doing the breathing, and this is a very good barometer for sensations. Because we have this body and we have these feelings within the body. And if the body would be uncomfortable, for example, it would affect us mentally. Our concentration wouldn't be very good. We would maybe notice that we get kind of cranky if our body isn't comfortable. We get restless. We grow kind of weary. We might just get tired of the uncomfortable feeling within the body. And I'm talking about pain or an indigestion kind of problem, or digestion in particular, you know. And so our body, as we all know, can greatly affect our mind. It can greatly affect our moods and how we feel about just typical daily activities. We can go through a day, and if the body feels good, our day is usually pretty good. And if our body is giving us difficulties, causing problems for us in some way, this can affect our moods. It affects our thinking. It affects who we are at many different levels. If it's persistent and it goes on day after day after day, we probably wouldn't be surprised if somebody would consider us kind of a cranky person or a grumpy person, because that's what would come out of the situation, for many of us anyway. And it's often said that pain or discomfort in the body, that the only good thing about it is when it stops. If we've experienced something like a toothache that was excruciating and never-ending, relentless pain, and then all of a sudden it stopped, we would feel very grateful. We would all of a sudden love life. We'd almost feel like we got a new lease on life without that pain. And so this affects our emotion. And if we're burdened down with something in life, not necessarily even anything to do with the body, although it could, if we're burdened with something, and then we become healed, or that burden falls away and everything is fine, we feel as if the proverbial backpack filled with 50 pounds of rocks have been taken off of our shoulders. We feel much lighter, literally lighter, and we feel more accepting of everything in life. And so much of this is information, really, to the mind and how we perceive this information. I was recently told a story about a woman that had cancer, and she was having all the regular chemo, radiation, and all these things being done to her. And she went in for a checkup with her doctor. And her doctor said, "This is amazing. We saw the results of your scan, of your tests, and there's absolutely no cancer there." And she felt so wonderful about life. You know, as if she was given a new lease on life. It completely changed who this person was. Only to find out that her doctor had the wrong report, and he was reading the report of somebody else's. This is a true story. And he had to tell that person. And this triggered a completely different emotion. Emotion of anger. And lots of other emotions, if you can only imagine. And so these were words that this person was hearing. And these words were perceived as good news, and then they were perceived as bad news. These many emotions were tied to this. They were greatly affected by these words that were being told her. But yet when we think about it, these were really only words. And in reality, these words are only vibrations sound waves that come into the ear, and then we interpret these waves, these sound waves, in a certain way through our training and our way of learning this language that we call English. These words are formed by somebody, and they can change who we are in just a matter of a split second. We can hear good news and be the most alive, loving, grateful, generous person imaginable. And we can hear the opposite, bad news, and we can just be crushed. As if life, it doesn't have that same meaning as it did before. Just from words, just from these sound waves, actually. And if these words can do that, if we can be alive and awake enough to realize that all of these emotions that we have are brought about in the same way, and we mistakenly feel as if the outside world is what affects us and affects who we are on the inside. That something on the outside world should be making us happy, and then we'll be happy. And that it's something on the outside, the worldly matters, such as anything that comes into the senses, what we hear and see and smell and touch, that we allow these things to affect us the way they do. And there's such thing as emotional intelligence that is being kind of a buzzword that trains people and teaches people how to notice this type of thing. And actually it's a great deal of mindfulness. So ask yourself, at this moment, what mood or emotion are you experiencing? What mind state do you have? And if it's difficult to find the word, don't worry about the word so much. Don't worry about sadness or happiness or grief or fear or anger, whatever it might be. Just notice the feeling within and notice how it got there. What brought about this feeling? Was it something that someone said or did? Some experience that we had? Or was it from the sixth sense? In Buddhism, the sixth sense is thought. Thought formations, the thinking process. Can you think of something and have it change how you feel? Can it change your emotion by thinking of something in a particular way, good or bad? Sure it can. So do we create our own happiness? And do we create our own sadness and despair? So again, ask yourself, what mood or emotion are you experiencing at this moment, this present moment? And notice during this meditation how that is changing, constantly changing. And compare this emotion with the Buddhist definition of feelings. Just see it as pleasant or unpleasant. The feeling could be neutral, but it's usually not very definable then. It's usually bypassed. If something is comfortable, it's usually registered as some level of pleasurable, good. If something provides any level of discomfort, we're looking on the other side of the spectrum. Unpleasant. And as humans, we'll do anything consciously and subconsciously to avoid the unpleasant and move towards the pleasant part of our feelings. We're like a steel ball in a pinball machine that is drawn towards the pleasurable like a magnet. And we allow ourselves to bounce away, bounce off of the unpleasurable feelings. And this is our life. But that's not always where the lessons are. And the lessons are in both the pleasurable and the unpleasurable. And when we understand this, they're both accepted. And we have a much greater chance for the inner peace that is characteristic of acceptance. Bring your attention back to the emotion or the mood that you were pointing out to yourself a little earlier. And see if it's still there. And see if it can even be found. If it is there, how has it changed? Was it replaced by something else? Or does it seem very, very immaterial? If we're resting in the present moment, there's a very good real chance that any kind of negative emotion or feelings of unpleasantness or something is just not very important anymore. It might be there, but not really recognized. Oftentimes when we're resting in the present moment, the moods and emotions don't really matter. Being overly excited and happy is too energetic. We know it won't last. Being very depressed doesn't really exist because we're not resting in the past, or we're not thinking about the future, or these things that can cause depression or sadness or anger or fear, or any of these things. So we create our own emotions. They don't come from outside of us. What happens outside of us is only triggers, things that cause memories, things that stir up the thinking process. And so these are gifts that we can either accept or not. These things that come from what we refer to as worldly conditions. And the true happiness, which is really a contentness, a feeling of being complete in the moment, comes from within. That's the part of us that can accept or not accept the gift, which is the triggers that could cause negativity, or even triggers that could cause positive reactions as well. So let's put our hands together in front of our hearts, if you like. May each one of us and all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to us. May no difficulties come to us. And may we all meet with spiritual and worldly success. May we have the patience, the courage, and the understanding to meet and overcome any problems or any difficulties that we might face. Thank you. Yeah, the many stories in Buddhism are laced with different ways for us to handle different situations, and including our emotions and what to do with them. And I think it's really true that if we control our emotions, we control maybe the most pesky thing in our lives, the thing that can give us the most problems. And it's not covering them up, it's not ignoring them, but it's wondering how to work with them, how to deal with them. And it's usually when we hide from them, that's when we have difficulties. But we want to be able to know what we're working with. And as emotions come up, that's the best time to work with them. But we want to see them for what they are. And so it's good to understand that we can meet them head on, face to face, and once we do that and see them for what they are, then we can really make up our mind whether how we want to greet these things. Do we want these what we're calling gifts in this story? This gift that this person presented the Buddha was his anger, and it wasn't accepted at that time by the Buddha. And if somebody does something that angers us, it means that we accepted that gift. Gifts don't always have to be something joyous and happy. Or there's a gift right there, a gift of sound.
It's not a call.
That's fine.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. But to understand our emotions is, to really understand a big part of who we are and what makes us tick. And many of these things are just natural. We're designed, by design, we're supposed to have emotions, and they're brought about to protect us. The fight or flight. If something scares us and we run, that's the body, that's the man or the woman being the man or the woman. If we are supposed to run from these things that we're fearful of, in most cases, especially I always go back to the primitive example of the saber-toothed tiger or whatever, chasing us in the forest. If we hear a roar, we should find protection. We should run. That's just the fight or flight mechanism that we have. And of course, it works the other way. If we hear something pleasant, we're drawn to that, and that is very, very natural. But a lot of these things are things that we should recognize as being false. If the sound of a barking dog causes fear for us, we should have enough sense to recognize and to realize that it's because we were bitten by a barking dog as a child or something like that. There's a reason that we are fearful of that. And it doesn't have to be that way. If we want it to be that way, fine, but we want to know what we're working with. And that's just an example. So in other words, we might hear the voice, a particular kind of voice from somebody, or an accent, and be fearful of that because we have heard that voice from somebody that gave us a hard time, or that accent from somebody that we didn't get along with at one time, so that raises something for us. It only makes sense that a child would be fearful of a red-haired man wearing all black carrying a big stick, because this child was beaten up by somebody with red hair wearing black clothes that carried a big stick. You know, so when they meet somebody at a different period in their life, wearing with red hair, wearing black clothes, carrying a big stick, they're naturally fearful of that person. That doesn't mean that they have to be, though. That doesn't mean that they're going to get beat up by that person. It just means that they can recognize that trigger, and that it's just a natural response. And once that recognition is seen, then of course it's taken care of. And we have all sorts of fears. Fears of food and insects and you know, all sorts of things, and all sorts of things that anger us too. But we owe it to ourselves to really understand these things. And a lot of it is just our perception.